Hey guys, sorry for the delay. A bit of a foobar on my side. I didn't click. I thought it was streaming, and it wasn't actually streaming until one of the guys here in the co-working space actually came and told me, "Hey Carlos, you've been talking for the last 10 minutes and there's no stream yet." So let's get started. So on this session today, one of the things I wanted to start out with is that I want to start talking about the basics of PowerShell itself. This is going to be a multi-part series where we're going to talk. Like, for example, today we're going to go as what is PowerShell, why PowerShell. Then we're going to go into what is a commandlet, how does a commandlet work, why are they called commandlets, order of execution in Windows of the PowerShell commands. We're going to go into what are modules, how do modules work, and we're going to keep moving on how to use the help subsystem, how to work with objects, how to parse objects and filter and manipulate all of that stuff. So it's going to be kind of a progressing series, one after the other. So today I'm going to be focusing primarily on why and what is PowerShell, and show a bit about the environment of PowerShell itself. Just in case if you hear weird sounds today, I do apologize. I'm doing the live stream from a co-working space that I rent where I come here. The guys from Engine 4 are gracious enough to provide me space to do this, since at home I have my two kids sick, so they're running around screaming at home. I cannot do this at home, so I had to come here to the office to actually do it. So as I mentioned, this is going to be kind of like a progressing series itself. So let's do something. Let's get started. I'm going to be going a bit on slides, so I do apologize ahead of time if you don't like slides, but it's the best way for me to kind of provide a bit of this information. I promise we'll go into demos. Here we are in PowerShell itself. So let's get started on what is PowerShell. So PowerShell is actually an automation and configuration tool and framework. So this is important for us. It is a tool and a framework specifically designed for automating and configuration. And that is awesome. That is what actually Jeffrey Snover had in mind when he actually came up with the idea of PowerShell. Jeffrey Snover from Microsoft is actually, we can call him the father of PowerShell. He's the guy that came up with the idea of how PowerShell itself was supposed to be, and he wrote the Monad Manifesto. I do invite you to search for it, and it describes what he wanted to do with this shell and automation framework, and it took him many years inside of Microsoft to finally get it to the point it is at currently. And he was able to achieve all of that he placed in that manifesto. Right now, I'm going to be covering two main versions of PowerShell. I'm going to be talking about Windows PowerShell. This is a version of PowerShell that ships with Windows. It's based on the .NET CLR. The other version that we're going to be talking about is PowerShell Core. This is the open source version of PowerShell, and this version is actually multi-platform. One of the things that we're going to be seeing also is that as of version 6 of PowerShell, PowerShell is actually open source, and it is cross-platform. So right now we can actually use PowerShell in Windows, Linux, and OS X. So this means that we can actually use this across multiple operating systems if we want to. So this is actually awesome. It means that code that I write in one version of PowerShell or for one host, I can actually use it in another host. For example, some of my modules that I'm working on, one of them is called Post SSH, that allows me for automating tasks with SSH. Actually, I'm writing that code in .NET Standard, and it's able to work on Windows, Linux, and OS X. For those of you guys that follow me on Twitter, you know that I'm a big fan of 3D printing. So I have my 3D printer at home connected to in a Raspberry Pi. It runs what is called Octoprint. I actually wrote a module that allows me to preheat the printer, send a different G code, and have it print stuff for me. And then I even have scripts that monitor my prints. And once my print is over, it actually is able to push an SMS message to me telling me, hey, Carlos, this print finished, and gives me information about what I was doing. So I actually use PowerShell quite a bit on my day-to-day stuff. I use it at Trusted Sec when I'm working using our VarsTotal account. I actually have a module called PoshVT or Posh VarsTotal that allows me to work with VarsTotal. I have another one that works with Shodan. I have another one that I work with Lee Holmes and some other people in the industry called PS Gumshoe, that is for forensics and incident response. And some of the stuff written in many of these modules can actually work cross-platform. Now, after version 6, PowerShell is actually licensed under the MIT license. You can find the source code and build instructions at github.com/PowerShell/PowerShell. Now, if you're a security professional, this is very useful because let's say you want to do research on how AMSI or the anti-malware scan interface actually works. You can take a look at it right there in the source code for PowerShell. If you want to look at how PowerShell actually triggers and set different warnings in the event log for stuff, well, you can actually go there and just read the source code and read how it works. If you're having problems with a module and you want to contribute, they take PRs. In fact, people have won awards for actually just submitting PRs, pull requests into the repo itself and fix stuff in PowerShell and actually extend it. So Microsoft has really embraced open source with PowerShell. Now, on Windows, one of the things we have to have clear, PowerShell is not PowerShell.exe. It's not PowerShell_SE.exe. They're only host programs that run the engine. PowerShell itself, it is the automation engine. So that is the system.management.automation.dll. And in your system, you actually have multiple copies of this DLL. And you may even have more than 1, 2, or 4 copies depending on versions of PowerShell, architecture, and sometimes .NET will actually do optimization work on its own code. So you're going to be seeing many times it being loaded at system.management.automation.ni.dll. And they're in multiple places, which means that if you want to actually do like, hey, I'm going to use AppLocker, Device Guard, or I'm going to use Carbon Black or any of these other tools, I'm just going to set up a rule to block this DLL on the machine or this specific DLL or this specific path when it gets access. I want information. You're going to be in for a world of hurt. So many times what we want to do is we just want to use the internal telemetry, internal tools of PowerShell itself. And PowerShell throughout the years have been improving in their what actually gets saved into the logs. And we'll cover a bit more about that later. So do keep that in mind. There are multiple copies of this DLL in your machine. Also, there are multiple host programs. So if you're running SQL or Microsoft SQL on your environment, more than likely you're going to have a program called SQLPS.exe. The diagnostic host, the self-diagnostic host, actually runs PowerShell automation engine in the background. So I was doing AMSI research, actually set up back at work. I set up a WMI subscription that every time the system management automation.ni.dll got loaded into whatever process to kind of trigger an alarm for me, because I wanted to see, and also for AMSI.dll, and I was trying to see different ways for me to bypass when I launched PowerShell, that I could bypass AMSI inspection. And one of the things I noticed was, hey, what is this host doing? And it was SD diagnostic host. And we're like, oh, that loads PowerShell in the background. Now, if I remoted into that host, I would have seen the WSMan provider host executable actually loads PowerShell itself. Also, one of the things I noticed is that as I was working on one of the systems, and some actions were being taken by Splunk. Splunk actually has its own version of PowerShell also included with Splunk. And we're like, huh, interesting. I even saw a couple of EDRs actually load the engine itself and kind of hook into it to do some analysis and other kind of work. And we're like, oh, this is super interesting. So just by knowing that, I think I'll kind of incite you guys to look a bit further, be a bit more curious of what other programs out there actually load this DLL itself. So now PowerShell does have its problems. One of the things that we have to take into account is that there's fragmentation with PowerShell. Like it or not, there's a bit. It comes pre-installed since Windows 7 and Windows 2008 R2. It comes with the OS baked in. You cannot remove it after those versions of Windows. And sadly, it's not updated via Windows Update, with the exception of Windows 10 and above and Windows 2016 and above. Actually, as you upgrade Windows, or you do the rolling upgrades of the operating systems and you move from one version to another to different release cycles in Windows 10, PowerShell's now being updated with Windows. But before that, it wasn't. And you actually had to go in and download the Windows Management Framework, download the MSIs, make sure that you covered all of the different dependencies for it and deploy it. And it actually had its problems. For example, one of those was that, let's say you were running a bunch of SQL and SharePoint servers and they were not up to date, and you decided to kind of push the latest version of PowerShell to all of those hosts, it would actually break some of those products. So you actually had to take some time. So that is one of the reasons that actually you won't see the Windows Management Framework appear inside of the WSUS catalog. It is to prevent for people not to shoot themselves on the foot and disable stuff. So this initially, the first couple of years of PowerShell, people were kind of worried and they didn't want to actually upgrade to latest and greatest versions of PowerShell. Nowadays, I'm not finding that much resistance because people actually do see the value of all of the enhanced logins and controls that we can have with the latest versions. Now, some commandlets and modules, one of the things that you're going to notice is that, let's say I have Windows 7, I install in Windows 7 PowerShell version 5, and then I have PowerShell version 5 on Windows 10, I won't have the same number of commandlets and modules available to me. That is because Microsoft, as time progressed, they came out with new APIs and new extensions to .NET, and they added new commandlets. And sadly, those are not available. Those APIs are not available in all their versions of Windows. So you run into that problem when you're working with PowerShell. And if you want to see how complex it is, you can actually just see here a table where I have the different versions of PowerShell currently, and you can see how on what OS it is actually comes default and on which ones actually supported for me to upgrade to. So you have to be kind of careful. Where do you actually install PowerShell, and where does it work, where it doesn't work, and all of that stuff. But one of the things that we're going to notice is that if we stay currently and write all of our code to work on PowerShell 2.0, that means that all of that code is actually going to work in more modern versions of PowerShell. So do keep that in mind. So you can set up your environment so all of your code and everything that you're running is actually being ran using the syntax of PowerShell 2.0. Also, if you decide to go a bit more advanced and you actually want to, let's say I want to run .NET binaries and load those so they can expose more functionality to what I'm doing on the target host. If you want to cover Windows 7 and above, my recommendation, keep everything as .NET Framework 3.5. Or if you decide to, and I know some people are going to go like, hey, Carlos, Windows 10 doesn't include .NET Framework 3.5 by default. Well, most customer environments, Windows 10 actually install Office, and Office actually requires .NET Framework 3.5. So you're more than likely going to have there. But still, you have to take your due diligence and you have to actually check to make sure before you try to load those libraries. But if you stick with the calls that are present in 3.5 going forward. It's just a matter of recompiling if you need to. And your code is going to work across multiple versions of PowerShell, and you're going to be able to load it. Now let's go into why. Why do we want to use PowerShell? Well, for Red, hey, it's installed in the system. That means it's there. We can leverage it. We can use it. So we can use, like my good friend Obscure Sec says, we can live off the land, and we can actually use this and use PowerShell itself to perform some of our attacks. Now, many of the you may say, hey, Carlos, but Microsoft added login, and if we install device guard, they're going to be able to block it and control it. I haven't seen device guard still in the wild. And yes, there are some controls. Yeah, there's some logging, but also one of the things that we have to keep in mind is a lot of people actually do not upgrade or do not implement many of this stuff. They have to actually configure it. They have to do the due diligence of setting up all of those controls and actually looking at the logs. I've actually been into environments where stuff happens and you go like, hey, we did this, this, and this. And then they go in and look at the logs. Oh, now I see what you did. And yeah, it happens. So we can still leverage it. We can still use it. We can still abuse it. We just have to kind of have that due diligence of checking what is actually configured and measure a term that I coined, which is the maturity level, the security maturity level of our target, if you're a red teamer. Also, as I mentioned, it's rarely upgraded. People just, if it works, why do it? Why upgrade? It works, don't touch it. Sadly, there's still a lot of places with that mentality. My favorite thing is that it provides access to all of the APIs that are on a Windows system. And we'll look at those in a minute. On the blue side, hey, a lot of the same stuff applies to us in the blue side. Installed by default on Windows 7, 2008 R2 and above. That means that we can leverage it. If you guys know Jared Atkinson, he's a hunk of a man. But in addition to being a hunk of a man, he wrote this tool called Power Forensics. It is a great tool. And he wrote all of that stuff in C# to run in PowerShell as a PowerShell module. It actually aids quite a bit in doing forensics. Also, it provides access to all the APIs. So if we want to use WMI, we can use WMI. If we want to do ADSI to enumerate AD and find permissions on OUs and look at those and do a bit of automation and stuff, we can do it. If we want to get access to registry, we can do it. If we want to set up debugging on a process, we can do it. If we want to deal with JSON, XML files, whatever an application puts out there or ACLs, we can do it. So it's quite flexible for the blue side if they learn how to use PowerShell itself. Now, it has better controls for logging and scripting, so you can actually monitor the environment. You can know who's running PowerShell and what they're doing with PowerShell most of the time if you implement it correctly and configure it properly. Its use and abuse can be tracked, and you can do centralized logging. But you have to set it up, but you can do it. So when we come to the different APIs, let's look at the different scripting engines that we have on Windows. So we have PowerShell. PowerShell has access to .NET? Yes. COM objects? Yes. ADSI and AD.NET calls? Yes. If we have access to, let's say, WMI? Yes. Do we want to have access to Win32 APIs? Yes, we do. System executables also. BB script, we don't have access to .NET, and we don't have access to Win32 APIs. JScript, same story. Same story with Windows Scripting Host, which is actually just a nice, very nice package of XML where you can embed VB script and JScript into one single file. Then we have HTA files. Well, HTA files, depending on the engine that we use, we may be a bit more limited. HTA, we can run either the JScript.dll or bbscript.dll engines. Also, we can run the JScript 9.dll, which is the Internet Explorer JavaScript engine, and that's a bit more constrained, more limited. But we can still do quite a bit of stuff there. CMD bat files, come on. The only thing we can do is run executables on those. BBA actually has quite a bit of parity to PowerShell. Access to .NET, limited. We can load some of the DLLs and do some calls in it. It's painful. We can deal with COM objects. We can do ADSI, WMI, Win32 API. and we can run executables. But as I mentioned, it's painful. Yeah, it's painful. I'm having flashbacks right now of writing quite a bit of macros for work, for our payloads. Yeah, it's painful. It's doable. It works, but it's painful. So when it comes to the controls, let's go a bit here on the blue side. PowerShell event log. Yep, say stuff to event log. Can I do transcripts? Yep, I can do transcripts of everything that is being done in PowerShell itself. Enhanced login. Yes, actually I can do it. App locker. Can I use app locker to control it? Yes. Can I do code sign enforcement? No, but with device guard and PowerShell you can, with both of them together. We also have API constraints. We do have some of those. When we do remoting, we can actually set up a couple of those, but it's a bit complicated, but we can do it. AMC inspection, yes, we have that. Command filtering, yes, we have that for remoting. Now let's go to VB-script. Well, VB-script, we have app locker, code signing enforcement, AMC, nothing more. Same for JScript, Windows scripting host. HTA files, event log, no. Transcript, no. Enhanced logging, no. App locker, code signing, no. API constraints, no. AMC inspection, nope. Command filtering, no. And HTA depends on the engine, just in case for AMC. If you're running the JavaScript engine for IE, AMC won't see it. This is something I've covered many years ago. Actually, another thing to keep in mind is that HTA, so let's say you have Emmet and you're using the attack surface reduction rules. If you're running Windows 7 still and you're running Emmet 5.5, or any of those tools, the attack surface reduction tools do not apply to HTA. For some reason, I can set all the ones I want, then I run HTA, and for some reason it completely ignores it. I set it like, hey, wshom.ocx, don't load it. The Windows scripting host environment, don't load that into an HTA file. Don't load that COM object, and still loads for some reason. I remember I reported that to Microsoft, but sadly it was when Microsoft was just abandoning Emmet and just putting stuff inside of Windows 10. CMD bat files, well, event log, no. Transcripts, no. No enhanced logging, yes. Some app locker controls. Code signing, no. API constraints, no. MC, no. Command filtering, no. Then we go into VBA, event log. Nothing gets saved into event log. No transcript, no enhanced logging, no app locker, no code signing. Yes, you can. API constraints, no. MC inspection, yes. If you're an Office 365 user and you have the full update of last year, AMC is actually going to be enabled by default to inspect. Now, if you install Office 2019, you still need to set up a registry key to enable AMC inspection, but it is there in case you want to do it. Also, we have command filtering. Sadly, we do not have that in the latest version of BBA, not even on if you're running, let's say, 2019 in your environment. So do keep that in mind. Now let's go a bit about the environment itself. If you're running a latest version of Windows 8, 2012 and above, the PowerShell Engine 2 now becomes a feature that you can actually install and enable on your machines. Now, it does have some problems. If version 5 has all this latest and greatest, and version 4 also does for login and tracking actions, and we can use that to do quite a bit of stuff. Yeah, sadly we cannot. If we load the version 2 engine, we actually bypass that. So that means, are you actually looking for the PowerShell 2 engine being instantiated in your logs? No, I invite you to look at your logs and check the engine version. And you'll be surprised. Also, I can actually run PowerShell in Windows PE. So I can set up a bootable USB drive with Windows PE and use that for incident response and forensics. And I can actually run PowerShell inside of Windows PE, which is awesome in my mind. Also, when it comes to architecture, PowerShell can be run x86, x64, depending on the version of the operating system. My recommendation here is just, let's go here into the demo. Let's go here into a VM. I'm tired of slides. I hate slides. But they do serve a purpose. Wrong password. Let me try. Cool, here we go. Let's close here. So, EVM's a bit slow. Here we go. So let's say I'm running PowerShell here on my machine. If it decides to work. Demo gods hate me today. Here we go. Thank you. So here I have PowerShell. Now here, let me open a Windows with PowerShell. And let me run another one as administrator. One of the things that you're going to notice is that depending on how you're running PowerShell itself, you're going to see if you're running as administrator or not in the command bar at the top. So one of the things that you're going to see is here you can actually see that it says administrator. And here you can see it doesn't say it. That's the only way you have to differ if you're running as administrator or not. As we're doing research, as we're coding stuff, my recommendation is that most of the time, run, unless you want to test how PowerShell will run as a regular user, run as administrator so you have access to all of the different API calls. So this is PowerShell exe itself. There are multiple ways that I can actually invoke PowerShell itself. I just have to do, let's look at the executable itself. PowerShell.exe -h for help. And we look here and I can specify my execution policy, a file to run, configuration name, Windows style, so I can either minimize, maximize, hide it. I can do import format. I can say, hey, load a profile, don't load a profile, how to set up the engine, do not exit, do not show a log. So I have quite a bit of options. Now, one of the things that we're going to notice is that if you've worked on the defensive side, on offensive side, you're familiar with most, if not all, of this flags here, like encode a command. That means I can do a base 64 encoding of a script, and I can run it directly from the command line. I can hide my window, and just to save time and save myself from trouble, I can actually do no profile, so that way none of the profiles, just like you have bash_profile in Linux or bash RC, PowerShell has actually multiple profiles that can be invoked inside of it to run. Also, we have the ISE. So if I go here and I run ISE, the ISE will actually run an instance of the engine, and it will actually provide me this windows down here where I can actually kind of run commands. So I can go here and can do ls, and it works like a terminal itself, but with IntelliSense. Example of this, I can do get dash. Here you see process, and I can do name tab, and I want to do con host. See, it's quite good. Does have its limitations. There are certain programs I cannot run. So if I go here, let me see if I remember the variable name. Since I did unsupported console applications, here we go. PS unsupported console application. So here under ISE, I cannot run any of these executables that you see here. And the main reason I cannot run any of these executables that you see here is that they create a subshell. And the system.automation.dll engine does not know how to interact with that subshell while you're running this inside of ISE. So do be careful, don't run any of those. I can safely run any of those here in PowerShell.exe because PowerShell.exe is actually a copy of cmd.exe modified for the terminal to be actually the system.management.automation engine itself. Also, if you have Visual Studio Code, one of the things that I highly recommend that you do is that you install the extension for PowerShell. If you decide to code instead of ISC Visual Studio Code, you feel more comfortable, one single scripting editor for everything that you want to do, make sure that you go in extensions and you ensure that you're actually running PowerShell and that you install that extension so you're able to use that extension there. Also, it gives you the benefit that once you install it and you run a new terminal here, that terminal will actually give you PowerShell here for you to use. As you're writing your code and you want to test it, you actually have a shell that you can use to do all of your validation of your work as we're running with it. One of my recommendations is that when you go here into PowerShell itself, I always tune it to my needs. If I'm running Windows 7, typically I just use Consolas. That's a very nice, I would say, font for you to use specifically because it gives me the advantage of differentiating the backtick versus the single quote. That is one of the best advantages I see with that, instead of also being monospaced on everything that you do. Remember when I tell you about PowerShell and selecting versions? You can actually even select it here. Microsoft's so nice that they actually give you that option here in their help. Also, you're going to know that, hey, you want to encode a command? Hey, here's a snippet of code in PowerShell that you can actually use to encode your command. So Microsoft's very nice to us there at providing all of that stuff for us. So let's go back to the slide here. So let's see some of the stuff that I may have missed. Terminal emulation. Oh, we have tab completion. So it actually behaves a bit like, let's say, if you've, let me bring the font a bit higher here. See, there's a few guys seen it on a screen, a small screen. Let's say you're using an XPS or something like that. You can actually read it better. So if I do get dash, and I can do tap, and I can move through the different commandlets to get what I want. So let's do get process. I can tap complete the different process versions. Then I can do dash and then just tab complete the different parameters. And some parameters are actually dynamic parameters, so they can actually fill out the values for me. So if I do here name, and then I do space, and then I can tab complete, and it will dynamically find what could be possible options for me. So this is very useful. It does autocomplete for me. Also, I have aliases. So I can do get alias to look at the aliases of each one of those commands that I can run. And here you can see I have quite a bit of those. So let's say I want to run ls. I can actually do ls here. I get a list of all the files. I can do dir, works the same way, but I'm not actually running ls or dir. They're actually aliases. So I can do here, get alias, and I can do ls. You'll see that ls is actually get child item. I can do here dir, and it's actually the same get child item. So I'm running this aliases. Same thing as bash. Same thing I can do in bash. I can do aliases in bash. I can do here. Also, I can do, let's say, get process. I can do nam and then conhost, and it will work. I don't have to type the entire parameter itself. I only need to type part of it. Enough of it for PowerShell to differentiate it from the other parameters to be able to run it. So let's go back into PowerPoint here. Now it does have some disadvantages. Only supports single byte characters. So no non-English languages won't display properly. Copy paste on older versions of Windows is a pain. You have to select and then enter to copy. Windows 10, after Creators Update, you can actually do Control-C, Control-V in the console itself. We also in Windows 10 we now have color coding for the commands that they're being typed. On Windows 7 we do not. This is thanks to an open source module that now comes pre-installed in Windows called PS Readline that allows me to do syntax highlighting of my command line. Same keyboard shortcuts that we have with cmd.exe, we have those same keyboard shortcuts with the PowerShell window that we can actually leverage and use. So do keep in mind. Man down, stream has died. I got a message here. God no. It says still running. I'll have to check in a bit what's going on there. I see I have quite a bit of stuff that I can do with it. I have my script editing pane, I have my output pane. This is the old version of ISE. On the newer version, I have actually IntelliSense command palette that I can run from. Also, ISE provides multiple advantages for me. I have color coding, keyboard copy and paste. I have tab complete for options, commands, and path. I have IntelliSense ISE version 3 and on ISE version 3 and 4 and 5. I have command reference pane, visual debugging. I have quite a bit here inside of the ISE. As I mentioned, it's almost perfect. It does provide some nice ways for me to identify what is actually being ran in it just by looking at it. I have history that I can actually navigate to see the history of my commands that I'm running. As I mentioned, there are a couple of unsupported applications that I can actually not run inside of it. So do keep that in mind. There's Visual Studio Code, which is now replacing ISE. Microsoft's putting all of their development effort into Visual Studio Code itself, that you can actually use and leverage it. Here's a look at it. As you can see here, I'll have a module as I'm working on it. I think this is PS Gumshoe right now here on screen. An old screenshot of it and some of the other modules I actually use. So we have history. I can go command up, command down. I can use the Commandlet get history to get into stuff. I can do in the PowerShell window itself, I can do F7. I get a kind of list of the different commands. I can choose those. This is something that comes from cmd.exe itself. This is an old one for us. I can actually, if I want to save history into a file, I can do start transcript, stop transcript. I can actually append to one of those files as I'm running stuff to be able to see all of that. So the environment is quite flexible, so we can leverage that. So as I mentioned, we have multiple profiles that we can actually use inside of PowerShell. So we have the, just like in Linux, we can use this guys. These guys actually get loaded every time I run PowerShell itself. It may contain variables, aliases, it can run code, so we have to be very careful, just like what happens with Bash. We have to be careful with it. Because it can actually be abused. So we're going to have our concerns with it. The problem is that Microsoft kind of went overboard in the amount of profiles that we can have. We have the general profile for all local shells and all users. This is in WinDeer, System32, Windows PowerShell, version 1.1, Profiles, PS1. Then we have the one that applies to all shells and all the users, even if they're remoting or local. This one is windows.powershell_profile.ps1. Then we have one that is for the user itself, under the user profile. You're going to have your own copy. And then you have another copy of your profile if you want to work not only with local shells you're running there on the keyboard, but also when you remote under your own profile into another box, you can actually have another profile itself. And if you're running ISE, you actually have multiple profiles also. that you can work from. So it's kind of complicated. So let's go into the last thing I want to cover, at least for today, which is the commandlet. What are commandlets? Commandlets are specific commands that we run inside of PowerShell. They're coded actually in C#. So let's take a look at this, guys, here. So you see me do get process. I can do get service. And one of the things that you're going to notice is that I have a verb and a noun. They're always verb-noun, verb-noun. Microsoft has actually standardized the verbs. So I can do get-verb. I can look at all of the verbs that are available for me. And this is the standard verbs. If I try to create a function or a commandlet that doesn't have one of these verbs, PowerShell itself will scream at me, and it will not be happy if I use one of these verbs and it doesn't like it. So do keep that in mind as we're running these verbs. So as you can see, I have here add, clear, close, copy, enter, find. I have common verbs, I have data verbs, I have life cycle verbs, I have diagnostic verbs, I have communication, security, and I have multiple others that I can actually use and leverage. And the reason that Microsoft actually chose the name Commandlet, I was told, was for search engine optimization, SOE. Because they want, like, okay, we want something that when people search in Bing or people search inside of, let's say, Google or any other search engine, they're going to find specifically stuff related to PowerShell. So what they did is they actually named it Commandlets. Now, we have multiple types of commands here. Some of these guys are going to be coded in C#. Others are going to be functions that I create, and also I'll have aliases that I can run. In addition to this, I can actually run command line tools. So I can do ipconfig. I can run ipconfig here. I can run that. If I want to use netsh, I can run netsh. If I want to do a commandlet, I can do get process. If I want to do a function, I'm going to call it prompt. And I can call this guy, let's output a string here. Carlos machine, here, space. And I just switch my prompt, because in the background PowerShell actually is using an internal function called prompt. So I overwrote that, and I have it now here. And I have that available to me to do whatever I want. So what have we covered today? Why PowerShell? Well, access to so much information, access to especially the APIs. So it's super flexible to what I can do. That's the main reason why. It saves me time. We can do the same thing if we wrote our tools in C#. We can do the same thing if I wrote my tools, let's say, in C++. But the barrier to entry, or the level of friction for me to be able to put out a piece of code fast out there and be able to leverage it, it's faster with PowerShell to access all of that data and leverage it itself with the existing tools like Visual Studio Code, like Visual Studio, like being able to run PowerShell ISE, have tab completion, have parameter tab completion, and all of that stuff. So that makes it quite flexible for me to use. So yeah, that's what I wanted to cover today. Like, what is actually PowerShell? Why do we want to use it? And kind of show you guys a bit about the shell itself. For the next session, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking specifically about what three commandlets should you guys know, and why you should know those three commandlets, and why, which is get command, get help, get member. And we'll be covering those. So I hope you guys like it. I hope you guys find it informative. I invite you to subscribe and click on the bell so you guys get notified of newer versions.